Good morning, Corey. This is a response to your video called the Selfless and Unaware Ground of Consciousness, which is a great title. Thanks for that. In which you're kind of developing and riffing on some of these ideas to do with consciousness. No porridge today. No porridge. Yeah, several things. I mean, you talk about irritability. You talk about consciousness as layers. You suggest that the term consciousness will be around. I make the suggestion that in 100 years' time it might have been, be not significant anymore. And you talk about family resemblances between, terms that may be related to consciousness. And I think that's a really interesting point. I think I would want to start there, really. Because I think, in a sense, that's, I agree with you, just to return to this idea that in 100 years' time consciousness is not really around. I agree with you that I think the term consciousness probably will, in the same way that life is still around right now, or that energy is still around in the vernacular sense right now. What I mean is that the study of that area, whether it be in philosophy or sciences or something else, will have moved on to a point where I suspect a word like consciousness, in the kind of general way that we talk about it, is purely part of the public square conversation, not really part of other kinds of discourse. I think they'll have moved on in the way that, as I say, life is. 100 years ago, 150 years ago, certainly, the life discussion was very similar to the way that consciousness is discussed now. A lot of life ideas were essentially vitalist ideas, that there is this life thing, this life force, this life energy, the élan vital or whatever, and and that was discussed in quite serious ways, wasn't it? And it's not that word stopped being used; it still is obviously part of the vocabulary, and in fact is used in all seriousness to demarcate certain states, like the condition of being dead, or the condition of being unborn, or the condition, other kinds of conditions around that, to mark border states. But it doesn't figure it doesn't figure very much within the sciences that are appropriate for that, biology and so on. And I think the consciousness is the same. Yeah, we'll probably use consciousness as a broad category for talking about a set of processes, and perhaps as you point out, to demarcate border states, but perhaps between waking and sleeping, or being anaesthetized and being awake, or being in a coma and being awake, or being alive and dead again. But I suspect it'll break down. No evidence for that, but well, actually, a bit of evidence for that, in the sense that we can track how vitalist ideas mutated and became transformed into the biological and so on sciences. We can track that, and I think there's enough evidence to suggest that that's happening to consciousness as well. Just an amount of publications that are being written on that, the amount of research that's being done in consciousness, how consciousness as an area of study has fragmented, usefully fragmented into different areas to do with the different aspects of that, some of which you mentioned in your video. So I think we're already seeing that. And the family resemblance thing that you talk about, I think, is kind of cogent to that as well, isn't it? Because you cite a whole bunch of ideas related to consciousness, which, yes, they're used in the scientific realm, but they're also used in this kind of discourse. We talk about awareness or self-reflexive awareness fairly routinely now, and certainly we talk about coma and anesthesia states and altered states of consciousness, and much more available to talk about than perhaps they used to be. Whether that be through pharmaceutical use or some kind of spiritual practice or whatever. Cognitive difference, mental health communities are much more articulate and have much more articulate advocates. So those kind of things, I think, are in place. And that's the death of 1,000 cuts for us, a vitalist, essentialist understanding of consciousness. But I think coming out of that, really, because I want to go into this thing about irritability, which I think is really interesting. I think one of the ways in which these things break down, as well as in the ways that I've already talked about, in terms of the breaking up of a discipline, of scientific disciplines, into more articulate focused areas of study, the recognition of family resemblances, and a more articulate way of discussing consciousness than as an essentialist idea. In addition to that, just this idea of the capacity to extend something like irritability beyond the boundaries of those things we would normally consider irritable. I can't remember the examples you used, but I think you might have even said something like cells being irritable, possibly even applying a term like irritability to atoms or subatomic particles, which on one level makes no sense, and of course I know you know that, because irritation is part of at least has been part of the vocabulary of if not sentience, then at least central nervous systems. But at the same time, this is how language is affecting this stuff, isn't it? I suppose I'm reminded here of a talk that Manuel Delanda did as part of the European Graduate School, and he was coming out of Nietzsche and specifically Deleuze and Guattari's, what was it called? A Geology of Morals, which is itself a riff on the genealogy of morals. But Manuel Delanda is talking about expressiveness and the idea of what it means to be expressive, which is, deeply, at least in kind of recent history, has been considered a very closely allied concept to, if not to human consciousness, but to kind of human creativity. To be expressive is, closely associated with the arts and all those kind of things, and it's fine. But he, as I say, coming out of those other writers, is talking about expressivity as a feature not only of particularly talented and gifted humans, not even of humans as a whole, not even of mammals, but of widening and widening that concept out. So that he talks about, of course, things like bowerbirds, which I've mentioned in videos before, and their kind of outsourcing of the expressive mating rituals they have onto the environment by constructing these bowers. So their extended phenotype, if you like, is part of, which is this bower, is an expression of their biology and an expression of their genetics, I guess, in some way. But then he extends it even further and talks about it in terms of something like mountains, and how geology, hence the title, Geology of Morals, how geology itself might be seen as an expression of physical forces, which of course it is. The shapes of mountains and the folds in the earth are traces of the expressions that the earth is making around it. But that kind of smooth gradation from that highly human, highly intentional, highly agent-centered, highly kind of enlightenment, autonomous subject understanding of what expression might mean. Here I am, a autonomous individual with a soul to express. That, for an extension of that out into the wider world as a way of thinking about things is, I think it's part of that same process. It's a part of the demystification of consciousness. So we stop thinking of it as an essentialist idea like vitalism, only perhaps resident within certain particular configurations of matter and energy inside human brains, or perhaps other animals' brains. Stop thinking of it in those kind of terms and think of it in broader and more diverse ways. And that's helped, I think, by the application of language like irritability, which is the one you use, or in which case we can do that, or indeed expressivity, which Manuel Delanda and Deleuze does. So yeah, think about that really. I mean, one of the things I come to this stuff with is to do with not so much by what is consciousness, because that's a big discussion, isn't it? But I'm always interested in what do we mean, what are we doing when we use a word like consciousness in a sentence. It's very interesting, and the language around that. Because in your video there you talk about layers, which is a really interesting one. Not separate layers, not layers that can exist independently, but layers of some kinds of processes, with consciousness being perhaps an emergent feature of these, or perhaps being existing in different kind of configurations in different layers, so you get that, which is a really nice one. But you also get models of consciousness, or ways of talking about consciousness, not fully constructed models. It just appears in the language. As I've been rereading a paper by David Chalmers actually on panpsychism and pan-proto-psychism, and in that he talks about consciousness quite a bit, but he almost always throughout the paper uses the word has, like this is the entity and it has consciousness. So it's like consciousness is a possession of some kind. So that's a really interesting thing, that you have these entities, these which might for Chalmers be something like subatomic particles, and they have it's an ownership relationship, which I think is again interesting. You also get a lot of that I guess kind of incremental models of consciousness, don't you, where everything is consciousness to a tiny extent, and then it just slowly builds, and at a certain point you pass a threshold and suddenly the lights come on. You know, like you're on the beach piling sand into a big heap, and at a certain point a sandcastle magically appears. You get quite a lot of that. Either, as I say, in terms of something like Chalmers' possessive models, where the grains of the sand on the beach of inanimate matter all somehow have this property of consciousness, and if it's put together in just the right way, as I say, the lights come on at a certain point. Or even something like the complexity stuff, which I'm quite taken by at the moment, the Tononi integrated information theory stuff, where everything is consciousness because everything has got some level of integrated information, even the helium atom or something like that, or whatever. It's tiny, but there's a little bit of integrated information in that. But once you get to a certain point, somehow you get the lights. Again, the lights come on. So again, it's a kind of cumulative process. So I think that just the way we talk about this stuff is just going to be significant, isn't it? And then just phrases like the lights come on. We can't separate ourselves from the language we use to talk about these things, I don't think, quite, can we? So yeah, thanks very much for all that. Irritability, ground again. I think it's great to use the word ground in that, because the ground of all being, ground. I like that as a metaphor, and it's kind of interesting relationship between your use of the word ground in the title and your layering idea. I don't know what it means exactly, but there's something kind of interesting going on there. Anything else? No, that's it. But thanks very much for that, Corey. Always a pleasure, never a chore. See you soon. Bye.